Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. It's where we challenge men to redefine success and to lead with integrity and to create a lasting impact, not just in their life, but the lives of those that they touch. And so I'm your host, Alan DeMonso, and today we're going to dive into one of the most critical skills that as men that we can develop. And that skill is emotional mastery. For years, we've been told that emotions are a sign of weakness. And what we found is that the real strength is found in being stoic. It's in pushing through and ignoring the feelings that made us human. But let me ask you, how often has ignoring your emotions actually worked? Have you ever exploded in anger to a loved one? How about this bottled up stress? Has it turned into a complete burnout? Or have you let fear stop you from stepping into the man you were meant to be? Here's the truth, folks. Emotional mastery isn't about suppressing how we feel. It's about harnessing those emotions as a tool for connection, for leadership, and for personal growth. And in today's episode, we're going to break down what emotional mastery really is, the myths that keep men stuck, and the powerful strategy that you can use to transform your emotion into fuel for success. And so if you've ever felt like your emotions are controlling you instead of the other way around, then I think this episode's going to be for you. Let's get started.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life. Many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
Before we go any further, I just want you to take some action. If you've really been serious about mastering your emotions, I want you to hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, and drop a comment telling me which emotions challenge you the most. Is it anger? Is it fear, doubt? Because it's your engagement that helps spread this message and it empowers more men to take control of their lives. So please do take 2 seconds, hit like and subscribe, and let's keep this conversation going. Now, in order for us to do that, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions to help you shape the mindset of what we're going to talk about today. So how often do you let your emotions dictate your actions instead of using them to fuel your purpose? And what would life look like if you could control every emotion, your anger, your fear, maybe even joy, into an intentional and a meaningful action? And if you don't take control of your emotions, who or what will do that? Now, all these questions, and there's so many more we could ask, are that meant to challenge us. It's meant to help us think deeper about how emotions impact our decisions, our relationships, and our success. And so when we do that, we get an opportunity to learn and grow as powerful men that we truly are. So let's get into our discussion. What really are we talking about when I say emotional mastery? Emotional mastery really is the foundation of self-control. It's not about ignoring or suppressing our emotions. It's our ability to recognize, to understand, and to direct them toward a more positive outcome. And I really think, even though we started by talking about being stoic, that's what Marcus Aurelius is really getting at, is being able to have our emotions under control and understanding what we can do to truly unleash them in the most positive and most proactive way. Doing this is a skill, and it's not necessarily going to be an inborn trait. And so many of us assume that emotional control is just this innate characteristic. Hey, some people are born with it. I'm just not, so I fly off the handle. But it's either you're going to have it or you don't have it. And when you have that kind of mindset, it's not a wonder that we struggle as men. And so the truth is that emotional mastery is really a learned skill, and it requires us to have continuous refinement. Just like they talk in lean practices and Six Sigma, it's a method of constant improvement. And when we tackle our emotions in that fashion, you're going to find that we can have much more control in how our emotions are expressed. And so when we turn reactions into a response, there's a big difference, right? Because between emotionally reactive men and those who have mastered their emotions, it's really about that response time and what that looks like. And so a reactive man is going to let his emotions dictate his actions. Man, that resonates so much to me when I think about it. And I just said that because we react, or I would react without even thinking. And while emotionally intelligent men pause, assess, and respond with intention. I don't know about you, but I've had a few mentors in my life who were just like that, who were able to pause and respond in a much different way. And I've also had those around me that were not that way, and where they were more of a reactive type. So I think there's opportunities for us to learn in all aspects of our life and how we can do better at managing our emotions. So let's take an example. Let's say you're in a really intense business meeting and there's someone there and they're poking at you, they're challenging your ideas. A reactive man, that was me for a long time, would immediately start firing back as I got to dig my feet in and make sure that I balance my defense for what is being said. But potentially what that can do is really damaging our relationships. And so as we get better at managing our emotions and we pause and we reflect, an emotionally intelligent man will acknowledge that these emotions are still happening, but they're happening internally, and then instead considers how to respond more strategically. This preserves both his credibility and gives respect for others, opportunity to open up for conversations for us to have. And so why is emotional mastery an essential for being a revolutionary man? Our emotions don't dictate our outcomes. Whether we're in business, relationship, or leadership, it's our ability to control emotions directly that affects the decisions that we're going to make. And so without mastery, we're going to risk acting impulsively. We're going to say things that we're going to regret, and we're going to fail to seize opportunities due to a fear and even doubt. And resilience is going to have to be built under pressure, isn't it? And so the most respected leaders are not those who never feel stress or are frustrated, but those who remain in control, truly under really being composed, I should say, when they're in the line of fire. The ability to navigate that for them brings them clarity, it brings confidence, and it makes it be a much more of an asset, especially when we're in high stakes situations. High stakes situations happen everywhere, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be in business. High stakes situation happens at home as well, when you know you need to have that conversation with your son or your daughter or your spouse. So when we have some emotional control and we build some resilience under pressure, we can respond much more effectively. It's our energy is what really impacts others. That's the first thing that they're truly picking up. And so whether we're a father or husband or an executive, business leader, any one of these, our emotions are going to set the tone for those that are around us. And so as a leader who reacts with frustration or maybe even panic at times, that's going to breed chaos. And a leader who can really manage his emotions and stay more calm and focused, inspire more confidence, is going to give people the trust that they can come to you with problems and challenging situations. You're going to be there for the best for themselves. I think of Winston Churchill during World War II, and the world was crumbling all around him, but it was his emotional discipline that allowed him truly to project confidence and inspire an entire nation. And despite all the overwhelming adversity at the time, he was able to really immute that fear, and he really just simply refused to let it control his decisions. And I think that's a real key thing to consider. It's not that there's going to be a lack of fear or lack of doubt in our lives. We're going to have these emotions or things that are happening to us and around us. It's how we respond to that. Emotional mastery, as we've been talking about in our relationships, is really key. And as I said earlier, it really helps us to build trust, doesn't it? Whether that's with colleagues or friends and even in family. And that the more that we have calmness around us and we start to build some stability and trust, people will start to come to us knowing that we are not going to lose control. They're going to feel safe. And really, as we think, as part of one of the things that we bring to our lives for the lives of others, is how can we make them feel safe? Safety is more than just being able to protect them physically, but it's also about having the emotional safety that they know that they can be protected and taken care of. And so that just reflects, as I've been talking about already, is just how we respond in our relationships. I know I've had several challenging conversations with my spouse and my child, and I have two boys, and I can tell you not every time those conversations went over well. But as I start to get better and continue to grow and learn and master my emotions, and then these difficult conversations really become less challenging, and we can move closer to resolution rather than having it end up in a fight and conflict and nobody wants to speak to each other. I think of two fathers when both are coming home from a long work day, and one is stressed and then he just snaps at his kids. That was me in my 20s and 30s for sure, creating a really tense household. And then the other, his recognizing his stress, he recognizes he's got some stress and he's coming home from the same kind of day, but he takes a deep breath and he chooses instead to be present and have some patience. And that's just a skill that I continue to work on and develop, and encourage you that are listening to this podcast as well, that we can always do better in how we show up. And so when we start to do that, we start to build a home environment that strengthens the relationships around us between father and child and spouse, and even external families. More people get closer and closer together. And I think about what Travis Bradbury said. He said, your ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others, and your ability to use this awareness to manage your behavior and relationships is going to be critical to your success. And he talked about that in Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It's a fabulous book, and I encourage you to read it. And we've been talking about lots of different things about emotional intelligence and emotional mastery. Let's start to debunk a few myths about emotions and how it ties into masculinity. One of the first thing that comes to mind for me is that real men don't feel emotions. And we've been tickling around the edges of this already in this episode. But it's truly a cultural lie. Society has conditioned us to believe that men that display emotions is really a sign of weakness. But really, from childhood, we are often told as boys that we need to toughen up or man up or buckle up rather than process how we feel. And I watch my young grandson and how he is working through his emotions. And while it's uncomfortable for me to see him work through when he's angry and he's a bit fearful, it's helping him be able to cope with that when he's 5 and 6 years old and develop the skills, versus not having him go through that and having to suppress it. And then he's dealing with it at 16, 26, 36, 46 and beyond. The reality is that the strongest men throughout our history, whether they were warriors or world leaders, were deeply aware of their emotions and they used them strategically. And again, I think of Churchill and I think of Marcus Aurelius, and I think of so many powerful men, Napoleon. All of these men faced and had to deal with their emotions. And so the consequence when we don't face and deal with it is we start to suppress, is that bottling all of our emotions doesn't eliminate them. It just simply builds pressure until ultimately they're going to explode in unhealthy ways. And that can show up whether it comes out as anger or addiction or even emotional detachment. And I think we can all recognize those scenarios happening maybe in ourselves for our own lives, but the lives of those that we care for deeply. Let's look at a second myth that I think is really important that we debunk, and that anger is the only acceptable emotion for men. When I think of anger, I think of it as really being this secondary emotion, because when we feel powerless or afraid or frustrated, anger is often the emotion that masks those deeper feelings and things are going on. So think about this the next time for yourself when you're feeling angry. What is behind the anger? What is it? Is there a value that's being violated? Is there something else that's happening? Do you feel powerless? Are you afraid about something? Because maybe there's something bigger going on for you. And so I really think that's a key point for us to consider. I think the problem with relying on anger is that while anger can be motivating in really short bursts, sure, getting upset and frustrated may help you hunker down and really get going. But when it becomes unchecked, then it's going to lead to where you're going to burn bridges. We're going to make really poor decisions, and our emotion, really that emotion is going to be completely exhausting for us. And so I would consider that a more effective alternative to that is truly mastering what this really involves us to do a root cause analysis of our anger. And again, I'll go back to thinking about the lean process. And when you do a root cause analysis in that scenario, it's about asking why 5 times. And it's really about diving deeper. And the other way to look at that is what would have to be true in order for this anger or this to be for you to feel this way. And as you start to unpeel that or peel that onion and dive deeper and deeper, I think you'll recognize that you'll get down to some really core stuff that's powerful. And then when you get to that point, truly that's where transformation is going to happen for you. And consider that instead of snapping at an employee for them doing a mistake, that really emotional, intelligent leaders needs to identify what's really going on, right? We're going to look at that from a business perspective, this analysis. So what's really going on for you at that moment and in the scenario, and maybe turn that moment more into a learning opportunity for yourself and for that employee. Same thing can happen, especially at home with parenting and in our relationships. When we do that and we come from this other perspective of trying to identify what the real issue is, what really helps us retain the respect that all of us are looking for as men, that it also improves performance of the individuals we're speaking to, whatever kind of performance that you're looking at, even as simple as making sure that they're cleaning their room. We touched on this myth earlier, and it's really about emotions make us weak. And really, emotions are a source of strength. Vulnerability is not truly going to be a liability for us. It's going to be an asset, because it's the man who understands and manages his emotions is far more powerful than the one who chooses to stuff them down. As we've discussed already, there will come a time where that will backfire on you. And so can you really be okay enough to be vulnerable and raise that level of masculinity so you can start to share the things that are important for you, things that you're feeling about a certain situation? What is it you need to get out of it? That helps set boundaries, and I'm sure we'll get in that topic on a future episode. And so real courage is going to involve us facing our emotions head on. And isn't that really the story of this entire episode? Facing things head on, and because it's going to take more than strength. And you just sitting there saying, I'm feeling uncertain, but I'm going to act anyways. It's okay to say that. We don't have to have all of our shit together. And most likely we probably won't in some scenarios, but are we okay with taking action anyways? So when we pretend that we don't have these feelings, that they don't exist, that's when we start to get ourselves in an opportunity to get into trouble. And so think about it again. We'll go back to you're running a corporation or a business. But when we can acknowledge that there's uncertainty in the decision that's beginning to be made or in the direction they're going, it helps us move forward much more strategically. And when we do that, we're going to see that you're going to get a lot more respect, not just for yourself, but for those that are around you, because you're displaying a leadership skill that says that you're willing to take all things into consideration. So it's an important skill for us to develop. And so I think of Brene Brown's Daring Greatly book, and I really like that book, especially for us. And she says vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. And I couldn't agree more than that. So let's really step into what it means to have emotional mastery. And so the first step that we need to do, and I've been again touching on this in a roundabout way, but now I'll just be much more direct, and that is we need to have awareness. When we recognize that we have some emotional triggers, the first step is knowing when and why our emotions are rising. And I have a colleague that participates in our men's work, and he's fond of saying that his father would tell him that he didn't put the buttons on him, but he just knew how to push them. And so I think it's important for us to recognize and be aware of what are those triggers that's happening for us. And so think about that when that can happen in any situation, wherever you're becoming irritated or you're getting intense, maybe you're starting to hyperventilate a little bit. These are moments that potentially could signal that you need to do a little bit of root cause analysis, and rather than simply reacting and getting a sense of what is it. And it doesn't need to be a half an hour or 2-day exercise here. It could be as simple as just a few short minutes just to quickly understand what's going on for yourself. And so throughout the day, ask yourself, what am I feeling right now and why? And doing that, regardless of whether there's an emotional trigger happening, just getting in the habit of asking that question. What am I feeling right now and why? Helps us to build this habit of having emotional awareness. It's going to be an incredibly powerful skill for us. Step two after awareness is going to be reflection. So after we question our after we have an emotional reaction, we're going to question it. And so instead of accepting our emotions at face value, ask ourselves this question: is this emotion justified? And is it helping or is it hurting me? And so we become aware that we're having an emotional trigger that's being activated. The activation has occurred, and now we're starting to analyze the reaction. And so was that emotion justified? And how is it helping or hurting me? Really powerful stuff. And so how can we strengthen that key part of reflection? We've talked a lot about here at the Awakened Man and the Revolutionary Man podcast is really keeping a journal of our emotional reactions, just journaling and writing some things down. And doesn't need to be a novel on each and every day, but just a couple of short things. And maybe that's the thing you need to work on right now is working on your emotional mastery. So that's what you'll journal on for a week or 2 weeks to get a sense of where it is that you're at. And so when we do that, you're going to notice that there are patterns will start to emerge, and it's going to give you an idea and some insight in how potentially you can move forward. And so we've got awareness, we're reflecting. What's the third step in mastering our emotions? The next thing is we need to take intentional action, don't we? And so and what I mean by that is really choosing our response. And so the difference between those of us that struggle with our emotions and those that master them, it's going to be our ability to make conscious choices about how we're going to react. That is a skill that's learned. And in order to learn it means you need to practice it, which means you're probably going to make mistakes and it's going to be messy. And that's just the way life is, isn't it, gentlemen? That we start to practice and learn and develop these skills. It helps us become much more emotionally intelligent. And so a real simple habit for us to do is before responding to anything that's an emotional trigger or it's an emotionally charged situation is to just take 5 deep breaths. Just slowly, just take 5 deep breaths. And this pause is going to help activate the rational part of our brain. It's actually going to activate the parasympathetic system. And it gives us the opportunity to slow down just enough in order for us to respond in a much more healthy and powerful way. I think about Eckhart Tolle and the power of now, and he says, rather than being your thoughts and emotion, be the awareness behind them, the observer of our lives. What a great quote. And so let me tell you a little story about a gentleman by the name of Mike. And Mike was a kind man. People admired him from a distance. And he was a mid-level executive in his late 30s. And he had built a reputation as a sharp decision maker. He was a relentless worker and someone who always got results. But beneath that surface, Mike was a ticking time bomb. His colleagues respected his work, but feared his temper. The single setback in a meeting could send him into a spiral of frustration, and his team learned to avoid him, especially when tensions were high. And at home, things weren't much different for Mike. His wife had grown accustomed to his short fuse, and his kids knew when they needed to stay clear of dad. And then one evening, after a particularly rough day, Mike snapped when his son accidentally knocked over a glass of juice at the dinner table. Mike's sharp tone and piercing glare silenced the room. Everybody quiet, and his son's eyes started to well up with tears, and he could just see his wife's disappointment. It was evident in her silence and in her facial expression. And it was that night that as Mike laid in bed, replaying the moment, is that when the realization truly stuck for him and he was becoming the man he had sworn he would never be. Man, I can totally relate to that. And his emotions were controlling him. And if he didn't take charge, he would lose much more than just his temperature. He'd lose the people who mattered the most to him. And so the next morning when Mike got up with this heaviness he just couldn't shake, he spent years climbing this corporate ladder. And because he believed that his strength meant never showing weakness and never letting emotions get in the way. But was he truly that strong? Was he truly leading with integrity? A friend at work also noticed his tension and handed him a book on emotional intelligence. And Mike, he just dismissed it. He said, not really wanting to look at it. And these books were given to men like him. They were to help him. But later that night, curiosity got the best of Mike. And as he started to flip through the pages, one quote stopped him dead in his tracks. And I just love this quote. This is between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space lies the power to choose our response. For years that Mike let his emotion dictate his reactions, believing his anger and frustration were just part of who he was. But what if he had a choice? What if he could reclaim that space and decide on how to respond instead of being controlled by his impulses? And so the idea was both terrifying yet liberating, wouldn't you say? And determined to change. I know Mike, he just started to do things in the small steps. And that's how everything always starts, isn't it? Just small steps. And so he began tracking moments when his emotions started to get the better of him. And he could see that patterns were emerging. His worst outbursts weren't random. They were triggered by stress at work or lack of sleep. And there was this underlying fear of failure for Mike. And when he recognized that these triggers was his first step, that he could finally start to regain control. And so Mike knew that awareness just wasn't enough. And so he needed to take some action. And so he decided on a simple mindfulness practice routine for 5 minutes of deep breathing in the morning and a quick self-check before his meetings and a conscious pause before responding in difficult situations. When he started feeling these frustrations bubbling up inside of him, he would ask himself, is this reaction going to help or is it going to hurt the situation? And instead of lashing out, he began addressing problems with a clear head. It took a while for his team to really buy into this was a new man, this was a new person. So they were still a little hesitant to share ideas. But as they started to engage more openly, there's no longer any fear for his wrath to come about. And the same thing was starting to happen for Mike at home. He made a conscious effort to be present. He started apologizing when he was overreacting. He explained his emotions to his kids instead of expecting them to just deal with it. He realized that strength wasn't about burying his emotions, but instead of channeling them into something much more productive. And so the transformation like this, like any time, is going to be slow, but the results were truly undeniable for Mike. And his son began confiding in him more and more. And his wife noticed his newfound patience. And for the first time in a long time, I can tell you that Mike started to feel that he was getting in control, not just of his emotions, but of his life. I can tell you, I'm happy to say that 6 months later, Mike not often looked completely different than the man that he was before. His reputation at work had shifted. He went from this volatile, high-performing executive to a composed, strategic leader. And his colleagues now would come and seek his advice, and they admired his ability to remain calm under pressure. And his boss even commented on the noticeable change, calling him a leader others wanted to follow and not avoid. And at home, I think the biggest transformation for him was obviously in his relationship. His son no longer hesitated before speaking with him, and his wife mentioned how much lighter the house felt. And Mike had always wanted to be this strong father and husband, but now he understood that true strength wasn't about dominance. It was about presence. It was about patience. And it was about emotional discipline. And so it's a long journey for Mike for sure. And it wasn't about eliminating any emotions. As a matter of fact, it was truly about how Mike wanted to master all of them. And so he learned that this emotional mastery isn't a one-time achievement. It's going to be a daily commitment to self-awareness, to reflection and intentional action. And it was transforming his relationships with his emotions. He not only improved his career and his personal life, but also ensured he was building a legacy of integrity, leadership, and emotional resilience for his children to follow. And so let's start wrapping up and summarizing our conversation today. So before we're going to do anything, what are we going to do? We're going to pause. It's important because that's where dangerous decision making can occur. So we want to really take a moment to drive out those unfiltered emotions and just be present, pause, and reflect. And we want to practice, again, go back to practicing some emotional journaling, really getting an understanding of what are the patterns that are happening in our lives and how can we really take advantage of what's happening and be more proactive in it. And developing some sort of routine to help you. Mike's story talked about doing a mindfulness routine, which is really powerful for Mike. But maybe there's something else for you, and it is continuing to journal. But I think it's really important for us to recognize that There are so many different ways for us to master emotions, and we just touched on a few of them today. And so one of the things I want to make sure I leave with you today is there's several key books, and a couple of them I mentioned already today in this conversation. That was Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Travis Bradberry, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and Emotional Agility by Susan Davidson. It's a powerful book on adapting to emotions rather than them controlling us. And emotional mastery isn't going to be about suppressing how we feel. It's going to be about harnessing our emotions to fuel ourselves for clarity in leadership and to build resilience, because every great man in history has had emotions, trust me. What set them apart was their ability to channel them towards something much greater. And today you have that opportunity to do the same. And so I'm going to challenge you one last time on this call. And it's simple. It's I want you to identify one of the techniques that we discussed today and implement it immediately, whether it's pausing before reacting, practicing mindfulness, or reframing negative emotions. I just want you to take that first step towards mastering. And so if you're serious about becoming the man who controls his emotions rather than being controlled by them, I want you to take some action to that right now. So one of the things I'm going to also offer for you today is go to our membership page. It's members.theawakenedman.net, and we have a free quiz for you there. It's called the Integrity Challenge. It's your roadmap to emotional mastery and personal leadership. And this free quiz is going to help you align your actions with your values so you can lead with confidence and clarity and purpose. Because let's face it, gentlemen, the strongest men don't wait, they decide. So take the challenge today. Let's begin with your transformation. And so thank you so much for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast and spending time with me here today. And I just really appreciate you being here. And let's make today the day that you take charge of your emotional awareness and begin leading yourself and others with intention. Thank you so much for being here. Aho.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is the Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.